phones. I'm not exactly mic check 1 2. I'm not exactly sure that this is the microphone section of these headphones, but I saw somebody else doing it. This is like my backup plan. Really, the only reason why I haven't been posting Patreon content is because the microphone on my phone is completely trashed, and like you can't hear me if I just have my phone on. So, and then not only that, the microphone that I have, the little tiny one that you guys see me use, it actually doesn't work because it's like so dirty inside where the phone plugs in to the charger that like it doesn't register the mic anymore. So this is just a little sound check. I do hope that this works because I'm just going to keep going on this video. Somebody, I think it was an Amy, Stephanie, somebody in my message box requested a specific video, and I was like, well, I should probably make this video for them considering they're still here even after I haven't posted any Patreon content after a week. And that's what I'm here to do anyway, is to post dog training type stuff and whatever else comes to mind that I might think could be valuable or entertaining or educating for you guys. So without further ado, I do believe the request was how to condition a dog to an e-collar. And we're probably going to get into that, but I guess there's just a couple of things that I'd like to say about the e-collar, which for me, I typically use the Mini Educator by e-collar Technologies. It's there are better ones out there, but I do believe that this is probably one of the most user-friendly and simple gadgets to use. And so that's why we use these, because when I'm teaching people how to use them, there's very limited buttonry. There's one little nozzle that turns the volume up and down. There's 2 buttons here on this side, and there's 1 button on this side. And there's a lot of ways to use this, and that's, I think, the first thing I want to talk about. But I personally like to simplify this tool, and I specifically use this tool for additional communication, right? In areas of which that we may not be able to communicate with our dogs previously. Like, for example, I use it as a great reinforcing tool. So, like if a dog over there does something and I go leave it and they don't do it, well, the second time I'll come back, with whatever level is sufficient for the dog, I will then tap a button and say leave it, and then that would be like, okay, almost like the tap on the shoulder that the dog needed to remember what it is that they actually were supposed to be doing, because life gets rough out there. There's a lot of competing motivators. There's a lot of things happening in life that are extremely interesting to dogs, and that just goes back to what I just said on a recent video. Dogs don't have bad behaviors. They just have behaviors. It's like a perfectly normal thing to be interested and distracted and drawn to, life's stimulants. I always say, like, that's why I always talk about, like, how are we helping our dogs perceive things? Are we encouraging them to see them in a little bit more of an unhealthy light, or are we actually helping them understand that that's not what I want from you? I would prefer you to come back and do this. And that's one thing that I do believe the e-collar helps us with. It's just a communicative tool that really puts us in a much better position to communicate with our dogs, which is why it's also nicknamed the cell phone. Can you hear me now, Moto? Type of a thing. But if we're going to be talking about conditioning an e-collar to a dog, I typically won't even go through that process until the animal has already got a foundation of obedience through just luring and free shaping, right? So the dog has already performed lots of behaviors. The dog, especially if we're going to be talking about tying in the sensation and layering the sensation of the remote collar into the behaviors that the dog has already learned. That way, it's kind of like easier for the dog to put the pieces of the puzzle together, right? Because what we do is we compound a verbal command alongside a physical sensation. And if the dog already knows what to do, we're going to get back to the conditioning process, but just, it's e-collar banter this morning, you guys. So if the dog knows how to perform the down, okay, down, down. We don't need an e-collar to teach a down. We don't need an e-collar to teach a sit. We don't need an e-collar technically to teach a recall. This is just an additional tool to sort of help the dog really understand a little more clearly. That's why whenever somebody talks about, clear communication, this is something that helps with that. It's almost like a great reminder, when a dog is like, not maybe like, that's why I go back to the reinforcing thing. This, tap, tap, tap. That's the reminder. And they're like, oh yeah, it's almost like the dog is like, oh yeah, that's what I need to be doing. I forgot. Sorry, I just got a little ahead of myself. But in any case, to condition an e-collar, when I start that process is when the dog already has a foundation of obedience. I don't really start the conditioning process until we've already taught the dog some things. Because now all I'm doing is layering in a sensation to a lot of which the dog already knows. It really helps the process out a lot. That's why if you ever hear me saying you don't just slap a fucking e-collar on a dog and go, there has to be some sort of relationship there already for me. There has to be some sort of level of like understanding of what's expected of the dog already. And then you layer a tool in like this, which is only going to continue to improve the things that you've already begun. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, that's how I do it. I don't really know how everybody else does it. Conditioning process. Now, the conditioning process for a remote collar is simply the process of finding what your dog's working level is. The working level is going to be the level on your remote, which on this remote, it goes 0 to 100, at which your dog first starts to feel it, right? And typically it's around 4 or 5. Now, it's important for me to make sure that the collar is on sufficiently enough to where the touch points are actually not just resting on the surface, okay? Because if it's just resting on the surface of the skin, I have to put my mic down for a second. If it's just resting like this, you may not get a true read. It needs to be on and also pushed in just a little bit. Not so much to the point where the dog is like having a hard time breathing, but tight enough to where it's not moving around and tight enough to where the touch points are actually in there sufficiently. And there's an abundance, there's 3 to 4 to 5 different even type of touch points depending on the dog that you have. A topic for another time. If you have a long-haired dog, you're going to want to get the wingtips. If you have a long-haired dog, you could also use the longer touch points, which this one comes with a couple of different sizes. I do believe this is a 1/2-inch touch point that it comes with stock. I do believe it also has a, no, this is a 1/4 inch. I do believe it comes with a 1/2 inch. And then you could even get the 1 inch, which looks like a fucking death contraption. It's really weird. But that's for like super long-haired dogs because it got to get through a lot of hair in order to get to the neck so that you get a true read on the button. Because that's a super important thing. Not fitting it correctly could just fuck everything up completely. In any case, the dog, the conditioning process, is basically finding the working level and then just working at the working level for a while with limited distractions. You're trying to layer this in to give them an understanding of what this is and what it signifies. That's the biggest problem with people that just put this on and start using it and they don't really know this information, is because the dog is fucking confused. They probably don't even know where the fuck this sensation is coming from. And so when you're conditioning an e-collar to a dog, you sit in a quiet room with nothing else happening around. You put the e-collar on them, and it's always, for me, side of the neck or the other side of the neck. That's just where I keep it. It's my personal preference. I do believe you could technically put it, but that's where it is for me. Working level. You tap a 5, you and the dog in an undistracted room, in a room that's not very distracting. I even will have some treats with me. I'll tap the button, and I'm going to look for an eye flutter. I'm going to look for an indication that the dog feels it, period. It could be an ear twitch. It could be like, yo, what was that? It could be an eye flutter. Just something indicating that the dog feels it. Now, typically, it's not so much of a significant response because you could barely feel it. And the dog's like, what was that? And then you give a dog a piece of food. You tap it again, food. Tap it again, food. Tap it again, food. Working level. Attaching a positive association to that sensation. That's why I use food when I do this. Because they feel that sensation and they get something cool right afterwards. Then I'll go outside and I'll maybe just start tapping it. Backpedaling, I'll tap it. Dog will come to me. Tap it, dog will come to me, pay. Tap it, dog will come to me, pay. All on like a 5. Not very traumatic at all. You're actually conditioning the collar to the dog, getting them used to feeling that sensation and also tying in an obedience behavior to that. So now the dog understands what this means. You've charged it, you've given it power, and you've also given it a positive association. All this leads to having access to a dog that can do more in life. Okay? Now, this is just a brief description. I could probably talk more about this, but that is the conditioning process. All right? Foundation. Working level. Positive association. Layer that in to all the obedience from the foundation. And then you can consider, at some point, Once the dog knows what this is, because that's, again, the most important thing about this, you can eventually start utilizing it for corrections, because it's going to be very, very different from the working level to when you spin it up a little bit. Now, if I'm using it as a correction, all I'm doing is I'm at the working level. I ask the dog to come here. They ignore it. I spin it up a little bit. Can you hear me now? Oh, yes. Now I can hear you. That's technically a correction, right? Because I tapped it at a higher level, and I also verbalized, hey, no, because you're going the wrong way. That's not the way we need to be going. No. Tap again and say, here. You're attaching the sensation to all these different sounds that they already know. That's all I got. I hope that helps you guys. Thank you for still being here. If you are, I probably lost fucking pretty much everybody by now, but I love you guys. Peace.